your grandpa was a white slave. Tell me about that.
Well, he was taken by the Germans into Nazi Germany during the war to be a slave laborer on a farm, I think. And the reason I bring it up in the book, as you know, is that I talk about slavery more broadly. And I just think on that issue, I really do think the world's gone completely crazy. Because the British Empire, everywhere in the world throughout history, every great empire, every great civilization practiced slavery and considered it either normal or good, or in some cases, a kind of unpleasant reality that we all have to deal with, like bad weather or whatever. You know, well, look, it's raining, like that's not nice, but that's, you know, that's what it is. And then along came the British Empire, which practiced slavery to the best of its ability, like all other empires before it, and then ended it. Not only within its own borders, but actually forced other countries to end it. To the point where there are countries in the Middle East that didn't give up slavery until the middle of the 20th century, and only under pressure from the Brits, right? So this is the example I give in Immigrant's Love Letter to the West. Let's say that we get to a point where, you know, eating animals is considered as bad as slavery is considered now. Probably will get there eventually, right? If the vegans have their way.
Do you remember when you were sat next to me and they put, I really didn't want them to, but they put a big thing saying vegetarian on my plate.
Yeah. Did I rinse you for that?
Oh, yeah. And I think Francis also, it was another time, called me a nonce.
Did he?
Yeah.
For not killing animals?
Yeah.
That sounds like a Francis thing to call you. But anyway, so let's say we get to a point where, you know, nonces like you
yes.
Have won.
That'll be in the trailer.
Yeah. Then would we say that the first country to end the practice of killing and eating animals should feel endlessly guilty about having once eaten animals? Or would we say that this was the most progressive society in human history?
Or the latter.
Right. So what's going on?
What is going on?
I don't know. I think British people seem to really like feeling guilty about stuff.
But they don't. This is it, because I wonder about this guilt, and I know that Gad Saad calls it suicidal empathy, and my gut feeling is we're not really talking about empathy or guilt. I think we're talking about domination. I don't think if you really got inside, these people think they feel guilty. Maybe I'm going in too far here, but I don't think they're sitting around really feeling guilty. They're feeling tribal. They're feeling like, I'm one of these people who has a go at my own culture because it's fashionable and it lifts me up. How is that empathy? Empathy is being able to understand both sides, even the unfashionable one.
I think there's definitely a lot of that going on, but I think the people with that idea of dominating others are also preying on other people who don't want to. Like, what I've just said is factually correct, it's logical, and most importantly, it's true, right? Have you ever heard anyone other than me make that argument? It's obvious. So you don't have to be a genius to make the point that I just made. You really don't, because I'm not a genius. So why is it that no one else has made that argument? Well, we know why that is. Most people are afraid. They're terrified of saying the thing that I just said, right? So that's not because we have... and that's because they fear the domination, but they also feel guilty. They've been indoctrinated into feeling guilty about it, which is why the woke left inevitably produces the woke right. Because if you tell white people that they're all evil, then eventually you're going to create people who are saying, well, not only are we not evil, we're actually great. Let's make whiteness great again, right? And that's where you get the backlash and the identity politics of the majority. Whereas my view is I just don't think identity politics is healthy, and we should have stayed well away from the crazies on the left, and we have to stay well away from the crazy ideas on the right about people uniting around their ethnic identity within multi-ethnic societies is always going to end very badly for everybody. It's just not a healthy thing to do. I think people. I went to the Slavery Museum in Liverpool. Great museum. It covers the history of the slaves and everything really well, the brutalities they suffered, all the terrible things that people really should be educated on. Nowhere in that museum does it say who captured the slaves. Nowhere in that museum does it say who sold the slaves. Nowhere in that museum does it say that white Europeans wouldn't even get off the boats when they went to Africa because they were so terrified of the local diseases. And those slaves were being delivered to them by other Africans who had been capturing them long before the Europeans ever turned up. Nowhere in that museum does it contextualize slavery in the way that I just did by reminding people that in every great empire in human history, slavery was practiced. At the same time that the Europeans were taking slaves out of Africa, the Arabs were doing it too. And that slave trade was just as bad, in many ways far worse. Many of the men would be castrated, the women taken as sex slaves.
Oh, God.
Right? The Barbary pirates would be raiding the coast of Europe, were raiding the coast of Europe to the point where Americans had to get involved in a fight, a war against them, right? So people they're not just uneducated about this issue, they've been deliberately miseducated about this issue because there is a kind of collective guilt that you're supposed to feel about it. And I don't think I think it's really important that people recognize the terrible things that human beings are capable of, and that this country, like other countries, has a history of doing terrible things. But I also don't think that we should beat ourselves up endlessly and present ourselves in a lopsided way on that issue. The truth about Britain's history of slavery is that it engaged in slavery in a terrible way, like everybody else, and then it brought an end to it. And I think in addition to recognizing the evils of the past, we also should recognize the achievements of the past. It seems a pretty sensible position to me.
Well, I think most people do think that, but they don't seem to be able to speak about it. Are you getting that feeling? Most ordinary people you walk around and meet, they understand that. I
don't think so.
Well, I know that. I know what you're saying. I mean, I don't know if people have put it the way you put it about slavery, but I think a lot of people are. A lot of people are aware that it wasn't just white people who kept slaves.
My impression of talking to people is people, generally speaking, do not know much about this. And part of the reason is it's one of those things that you don't necessarily want to look into. Yeah. Because what happens if you actually find out the reality? What do you then do with that information? So
was it a great-grandfather or grandfather?
That was my grandfather.
That was your grandfather. And on the other side, there was also what seems like slavery.
Well, my grandmother on my dad's side, she's my grandfather's second wife, but she's my grandmother for all intents and purposes. She was born in a gulag, in a forced labor camp for political prisoners. So you have the wrong opinion, or you're the wrong ethnicity, or you're from the wrong country, or you have the wrong opinions about stuff. You go to this camp for 10 years and you have to do slave labor, basically.